being over there was the easy part. Coming home was the hard part.
And welcome to another episode of Breaking Down Addiction, a podcast brought to you by National Addiction Specialists. My name is Johnny Phillip. I'll be your host today, and I'm joined with Chad Elkin.
How's it
Thanks
going?
for joining us today. And our very special guest today is Mr. Brandon Fender.
Thank you for having me.
Treehouse
Appreciate it.
It's great to have you here
So
today.
good to have you, man.
Thank you.
Especially coming on the heels of Veterans Day. We all at NAS just thank you so much for your service.
Yeah, thank you.
And
I
everything
appreciate
you've
that.
done. And also service to other men, and other veterans too.
Yeah, it was a crazy week. So the Marine Corps birthday, for any Marine, the Marine Corps birthday is like a big deal. It's more important than your own birthday. All right, so having the Marine Corps birthday and then Veterans Day, it's a big week.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
No, seriously, big week. Glad to have you here.
Appreciate
And I want to start off all these episodes with the same question. And if you were sitting across from yourself in active addiction, what would you say to yourself right now?
Yeah, that's a big one. I would say buckle up. Buckle up. It's going to be a long ride. But also give yourself a little grace. Give yourself a little grace. We all go through situations, times in life that really build us. I always say that everything that I've went through in life, I wouldn't change anything because it's made me the man that I am today. I think we're all tested with trials, tribulations. We've all been through different sorts of adversities in life, traumas in life that really shape us into who we are. And I'm a big believer that everything happens for a reason. So be able to understand my why, understand my purpose, understand what makes me tick today, it's also a blessing as well.
Does that go along with not having any regrets?
I mean, there's definitely some things that I would do different. There's definitely a lot of things that I would do different, but we only see a snapshot of our life. We only see a snapshot of what's going on in the moment. There's a bigger plan laid out for us, and it's hard to see that going through the storm. Definitely would do some things different, but also am coming to peace with a lot of the things that happened that shaped me into the man I am today.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that. God has a plan for everybody, and failures can be learning experiences.
Exactly.
So, you learn from it, makes you who you are.
Yeah. It took me a long time to kind of shift that mindset. I think for a long time it was living in a victim mentality as far as poor me, this happened to me, that happened to me, so I deserve to do X, Y, and Z. Being able to take ownership of my life and look at it through that lens. When I'm taking ownership of my life, everything I've went through, I'm taking back the power, right? When I'm taking back the power, I'm letting go of resentments. So that was a big step in just changing that mindset.
That's the biggest thing for me in recovery, is resentments. And giving yourself grace, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah. You were talking about like victimhood. I feel like today's society, almost encourages this victim mentality. You know what I mean? And I totally agree with you. What everybody needs is the opposite of that. You need to take ownership of your own life. You're in control. Be disciplined. Do what it takes. Whatever it takes to get the job done.
I mean, as a society, we've gotten so far away from, it's genetically ingrained in. It's like humans are built to bond, they're built to move. As a society, we've gotten so far away from that because everyone is banning for your attention, whether it's on an algorithm, on a phone, whatever it may be. We've gotten so far away from this right here, human-to-human connection and moving. You can sit on your couch and eat ranch bugles all day and get everything delivered to you via your phone. We've gotten so far away from putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations. Growth comes through adversity, putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations, mentally, physically, and we've gotten very far away from that as a society. So I could talk about that all day, so going to get me fired up on a Thursday morning.
Yeah.
You excelled at sports younger, and speaking of discipline, you joined the Marine Corps. right after 9/11, and how did you bring some of that discipline?
And what sports did you play?
Soccer.
Okay,
Yep.
awesome. Not a very healthy sport, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah, I played tennis, so
Yeah.
we got the ladies in tennis.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously, but yeah, no, soccer's a great sport. It feels like it's getting so much more popular in the U.S. right now too, which is awesome.
Yeah. I waited till later after soccer for the ladies, but
Yeah,
it
right,
wasn't
right,
because of
right.
soccer.
Did you play just in high school? Or
I played
for-
my whole life,
Okay.
And even thinking about, those were some of the best days of my life, just being a kid, not having any worries, waking up early in the morning, and I'm very competitive. So even from a young age, that definitely had an ingredient in building that discipline, being out there doing things late at night when nobody else was out there, practicing until, when I was a kid, you gave me a ball and I would be happy for hours. I could go outside and have a ball with me, and I was good for hours. So that discipline, carrying on into the Marine Corps, is definitely shaped another piece of that discipline, but it definitely was the kind of the foundation, I would say, even from a young age. Growing up in a family where my father was an alcoholic. My mom remarried when I was in third grade. I married a man who took me, my mother, and my sister in. Very good man, hard worker, but we really didn't talk about our emotions. He definitely helped shape a very good work ethic for me. So that, along with, just the sports aspect, was a foundation of that going into the military.
A lot of people that play sports, I've found that have high level sports, done well in sports, can apply that in other areas of their life, later on. So I've known friends from high school. I became a physician. There's a guy I knew that was making C's in high school, but he was a high level athlete. And then I went to med school, and he was in med school. I was really surprised. I was like, man, I thought he was a C student. But he went to college, started making straight A's, and then was kind of able to apply what he had learned in athletics and that discipline from that to other areas of his life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're exactly right concerning that.
Well, talking about you joining the Marine Corps post 9/11, was 9/11 a catalyst for you joining?
Yeah,
or
for
what
sure.
was going on there?
Yeah, for sure. I really didn't apply myself a lot in school either. It was sports and chasing ladies, I guess.
I can look
Obviously
over
not through the soccer. I should have played tennis, I guess.
Duh.
But yeah, my goal was I did enough just to get by. I was going to move down to Wilmington, North Carolina, play soccer there, and attend a community college. And then 9/11 happened, and I remember sitting in German class, watching the TV, the little roll-in TV that they would bring in. Remember, watching those planes fly into the towers, and having hate in my heart. And
Like it was
watching,
already there, or did it ignite it?
it ignited it.
Okay.
It ignited it. I've always been a very patriotic, even as a young kid. I was very patriotic, but seeing fellow Americans, the horrors that we've seen on TV, that everyone's seen, and remember what was going on that day. But yeah, it ignited a hate in my heart, and I wanted to do something about it. I would go to the library every morning and read the newspaper, and I just remember, after that, and within the next 2 years, all the things that were happening in Afghanistan, but a lot of it was Marine staging and ready to invade Iraq, and I felt like I needed to do my part, and yeah, it was fueled early on by a lot of drinking and hate in my heart, and that's kind of what drove me to the Marine Corps.
And what was that training like? Because there's probably some preparation there.
Yeah, unfortunately, my training early on was just drinking a lot of beer, so it probably wasn't the best preparation, but and I was completely, when we got there and we started marching around, I'm like, I didn't sign up for this, but yeah, so I went in 2003 and went down to Paris Island for boot camp. So anyone that's familiar with Paris Island, South Carolina, and the sand fleas is a whole nother thing to deal with. If you're not familiar with sand fleas, Google it. Anyway, we would sit out there, and after chow time, we would sit out there in the evening at the position of attention, and the sand fleas would be all over you. And if you as much as swatted one or killed one, you're burying that sand flea. And their thing was, y'all just ate, let them eat. And at the moment you're like, this guy's being an asshole or whatever it is, but it's discipline. It's really ingraining a foundational sense of discipline.
I found some of the best leaders in business have been in the military because they get that foundation of structure, that foundation of discipline, and also how to overcome adversity and how to deal with a lot of people, to be able to lead a lot of people. And so I found some of the most successful business leaders in the U.S. were in the military. And so I think it's a great leadership training for, later on in life too. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even after the military, being able to incorporate a lot of the things that I learned in the Marine Corps, a lot of things and lessons that I learned in combat, dealing with different personalities, but also just building a good team. If you look at building a team, you probably don't want 10 of me out there running around because things would be very hectic. So I need my analytical people. I need my people that are going to be the glue to the team. So putting people in positions to win, playing off their strengths, and there's nothing better than a team that's jiving together, communicating, attuning to each other, and putting people in positions to win and succeed.
That's awesome.
Was the preparation in boot camp, were you forming your team then too? And what was boot camp like?
I was getting formed.
Okay.
I wasn't forming a team. I was getting formed.
Okay.
And in the way of push-ups and sand fleas, and so boot camp, 13 weeks. You have 3 different phases. The first phase is kind of just breaking you down, kind of breaking you down and to that base level, and then building you up. And building you up as a Marine, and building you up to train to fight. And that's what it was, like that mindset. You got to think, I went in 2003. We had already invaded Iraq. Things were starting to get going there. We have, the war in Afghanistan going. So, they were building you up with that mindset of you're going to combat. You're going to fight. You're going to have your friends killed. You might have to kill someone. And it was that mindset.
And it's kill or be killed.
Exactly.
Well, the Marines are kind of the first strike force too, right? So, that is true for y'all. I mean, like y'all go in first. A lot of our listeners probably don't know that, but I mean, is that?
Yeah, the Marine Corps, that kind of what we're known for is to go in, kind of neutralize and, break shit. But kind of during the GWAT era, we kind of got away from what the Marine Corps is known for. Our mission usually is not to go into somewhere, take down the opposing force and stabilize the place. And, a lot of, in Iraq, Afghanistan, that's what we were doing. It was stabilization, go in there. And, it was a different, even in Iraq and Afghanistan were 2 different wars. Iraq was a lot of house-to-house, door-to-door type stuff. Around 2005 is when IEDs became very prominent, and they...
That's scary stuff.
Yeah. That people always ask me, like, what were some of the scariest times in your life? It wasn't getting shot at or blown up, whatever. It was literally walking on patrols, not knowing if that next step is going to be your last. So that forms that very, high sensory, always on, head on a swivel kind of mentality.
Is that stressful? And did you have a level of anxiety that you never thought that you could reach?
I always say, like,
in it.
Yeah, being over there was the easy part. Coming home is the hard part. You think of being on the gas the entire time and coming home and trying to put the brakes on, like our nervous system is not designed for that, right? So that was the hardest part, was coming home and trying to understand what is going on within me. You know, coming home and, you know, they say, America's at war. Bullshit. America's at the mall. America's at Burger King.
Right.
So that was frustrating.
Yeah. How many deployments?
4.
4 deployments?
Yeah.
Okay.
2 to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan.
Great. And how many years total were you in?
12.
12 years. Great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So 12 years in, and these deployments. So you have an injury at some point.
Yeah.
Probably started
Walk us
racking
through
up
that.
multiple injuries would be my guess. So
Yeah.
a lot of the injuries are cumulative.
You know, a lot of the things, like, and my injury wasn't even the most, like, traumatic thing per se to happen to me. You know, there was, and, you know, I started drinking at an early age, even in high school. You know, I was the guy that everyone would drink on the weekends. I'm the guy drinking Coors Light on the way to school every morning in my 96 Honda Civic, thinking I'm damn from Fast and Furious. You know, so this started very early, you know, and then, you know, I was in Fallujah in 2004 during Operation Phantom Fury, which is one of the bloodiest battles of the Iraq War. And then back 2005, and, you know, there was a situation to where we were at the government center recruiting Iraqi police and Iraqi army, and, you know, there was a guy they called the Fallujah Sniper who had been shooting a lot of Marines, shooting a lot of soldiers, and we're at the government center recruiting these guys, and me and a couple of buddies are on gate guard out there, you know, and it's early in the morning in the city. You know, Fallujah is a very big place. People, during Operation Phantom Fury, a lot of the populace had left. You know, 2005, they're starting to come back. You know, the city's kind of opening up again. You know, a lot of foreign fighters were coming over the borders during these times. So it wasn't just, you know, Al-Qaeda and things of that sort that were fighting. We're fighting a lot of the foreign guys coming across the border. But, yeah, we're at the government center, and me and 2 of my friends, and, you know, one ended up getting shot in the throat. He was wounded, you know, very badly. My other buddy get shot in the head, you know, so he's KIA right then and there. The other one shot in the throat. You know, here I am, 19 years old, trying to decipher this situation. You know, within minutes, we had more Marines there. But, you know, the big thing was, a few months later, we ended up getting this guy. And what he would do is he would video this stuff and put it out as propaganda, you know. And
It's terrible.
I got that video a few months
Pretty
later,
dark.
and watching that video and seeing myself, you know, from me to you, you know, seeing my friends get shot and wondering, why not me? I would watch that video over and over and over, thousands of times.
So major survivor's guilt.
Major survivor's guilt. You know, I would get hammered drunk and watch this video over and over to where it was, you know, just ingrained in my brain. You know, why not me? Why not me? And these guys had families, they had kids. I'm just a 19-year-old punk, you know, so it created a very negative belief system from that point, you know, and this went on for years. You know, it wasn't until years later during therapy I ended up deleting that video, you know, but you wonder,
Yeah.
from me to you, why not me?
Let it go.
I'm sorry about your buddies.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
What was your experience as far as not necessarily with yourself, but like looking around while you're in the Marines with what you saw other people struggle with? Like, you know, my understanding is that active military obviously has a higher risk of alcohol, legal drugs, alcohol use disorder, et cetera, but lower drug, illicit drugs like cocaine, heroin, things like that. And my thought is potentially because of the accountability from required drug screens and things like that. What was your experience in relation to that? What did you see?
Yeah, you know, early on it was, you know, the Marine Corps, they breed alcoholics. Like, that's what we do. We fight and we drink beer and break shit. Things that we're very, very good at. You know, so, you know, early on, yeah, everyone dealt with things with dark humor, with alcohol. But then as, you know, the war on terrorism continued and these guys were getting injuries, that's when the pain medication started coming into play.
Right.
You know, so early on it was a lot of alcohol, a lot of dark humor. You know, the divorce rate is ridiculously high in the military, especially during those years. But what I've seen as the years went on, and you know, it's an era of if you can walk, you can fight. You don't talk about what's going on. If you can walk, pick your shit up and let's go fight. And that was kind of the mindset. You know, it wasn't a, hey, I'm struggling. It's like, no, you pick your stuff up and you go fight. But as GWAT went on, we were seeing guys with these severe injuries. That's when the pain medication started coming into play. That's when these guys were getting out, and the VA was notorious from overprescribing opiates.
I think they've kind of gotten away from that now. I think, but
It's
yeah,
definitely gotten better.
it's gotten better. But at that time period, it definitely was a big issue for sure. And so from your experience, you saw a lot of alcohol, and then once veterans accumulated a bunch of injuries, they got on opioids from the VA, and that could potentially lead to opioid use disorder and some other issues.
Exactly.
Along with, did you see like a lot, you know, combat stress, PTSD, all that type stuff? You think that leads to more substance use disorders as well?
Yeah, for sure.
Kind of later on.
You know, even in my own experience, it's, you know, they're giving me these pain medications. Is it helping with the pain? Maybe, but it's numbing everything else that I don't want to think about, everything that I don't want to talk about. It's numbing, it's suppressing all those emotions that I have inside of me that I can't tell anybody, because then I'm going to look weak. You know, if I come out and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, then, hey, you're non-deployable, you can't fight. You know, and every Marine's dream is to go fight, really.
So you start experiencing volumes of pain, and what's your relationship with pain? Do you start using around that time then, or what time did your usage start?
After I got hurt, and you know, even to this day, I've had, I think, 35 surgeries on almost every part of my body, you know, and once again, my relationship to pain has changed over the years. It was, like we talked about earlier, very victimhood in the beginning. That's what, you know, early on when I started having these surgeries, I got addicted to opiates, to pain medication, started outsourcing that. It got very expensive. And I remember I was at the VA one day, and there was a guy sitting outside with an older man, and I asked him if they needed a ride, and he said, yeah, we're going, you know, to where I lived at in the same area. And I said, hey, you got any pain pills you want to sell? And he said, no, but I got some heroin. You know, and
Cheaper.
you know, at this point, I'm spending, you know, $150, couple $100 a day on pain medication. I'm retired now. And I remember the first time that and mind you, like, I come from a very good family with good values, good morals, good work ethic, you know, loving parents. And I remember the first time that I stuck that needle in my arm, all that was gone. But I also felt like I had just been wrapped up with a cozy blanket and that everything was okay. You know, all the trauma, all the things that I had went through in life, I felt like I had just found something to fix everything.
You found the solution.
Exactly.
That's what you thought at the time.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit more about that concerning the heroin use on a daily basis. You know, how much were you using? How often? How many days? Were you using it with other people?
Yeah, I mean, you know, once it started, you know, I'd already had a pretty severe pain medication issue going on. You know, I started using heroin. I was probably using anywhere from 2 to 3 grams a day.
Wow.
You know, I was retired, so I got a check, and all that was going towards me using.
Did you start off that high, or did you kind of like
I mean,
build up to that
I
amount?
had a very high pain or tolerance when it came
Right.
to pain pills already. So, it didn't start out at 2 to 3 grams a day, but it rose up to that. And that wasn't even to get high. That was to feel normal.
Right.
You ask about, was I using with people? No. I was ashamed. I had so much shame and guilt, surrounded by even living. I didn't want to live. I had so much shame and guilt from being the quote unquote hometown hero to now I'm the hometown junkie. So nobody knew what I was doing. And they got to a place, I was driving an hour and a half each way to get heroin every single day. I'd load my dogs up in the morning, go get heroin, come back, sit on the couch, watch NCIS.
Where were you getting the heroin from? I mean, not the person, but like what city or where?
Yeah,
where
it
were you
was
driving?
Greensboro, North Carolina.
Okay.
Greensboro and Charlotte.
Yeah.
At that time, I'd kind of got tied in with the cartel a little bit and, started building some weapons for them in exchange for running drugs across state lines. So it got pretty deep in very quickly. And at this time, after I retired, I moved back to North Carolina, and I moved into the same neighborhood as my parents, as my mom and stepdad. I bought a house right through the woods, which at the time I thought was a great idea. I'll be close to mom, and terrible idea.
Did she know you're using at this point?
She knew that there was some stuff going on. It was later on that she came over and found some needles and kind of knew the extent. She didn't know the real extent, but I would go knock on her door in the middle of the night, and I would say, like, there's somebody out here. Like, I thought there was people in the woods, like, coming to get me.
Paranoia.
There's, my stepdad would get in his truck and sit in the cul-de-sac with his lights on, shining into the woods for hours while I laid in the woods with a weapon, firing off rounds sometimes.
Wow.
Because I literally thought, like, there was people coming to get me.
So that could be some potential combined, PTSD or substance-induced co-occurring.
Do you think the
use disorders as
heroin
well?
made that more extreme? Or
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
At some point, did it kind of dumb it down a little bit, or was it always extreme during the heroin usage?
It was extreme, and you got to think that the compound trauma on compound trauma on compound trauma, there was so much stuff built inside of me that, I had a pistol in my mouth probably every night.
Wow.
I did not, I had so much guilt about surviving, I had so much guilt about surviving and still being here that I didn't give a damn if I lived or died, so
Thank you for
I
sharing
was,
that.
I was going 100 miles an hour and I did not care.
Well, I think military veterans do have a higher suicide risk, especially if they have a history of what you had, which is combined injuries plus PTSD.
Yeah, I've lost more friends to suicide and overdoses than I did in combat.
You mentioned the cartel. Tell us a little bit more about that. What were those experiences like?
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. I would call a guy who would call another guy to meet me, and they would have these compartments in their vehicles. He'd press a button and hump the horn once, hit the brake, and like some crazy shit would happen to where these things would pop up. I remember one day, the first day I met him, this thing popped up and he's got like, I don't know, 500 balloons there. I'm like, holy shit, this is like, I've hit it. I've hit it here.
What?
And, they started understanding my background a little bit, and I was telling them some things that I was doing. And he said, well, you want to do a little work in exchange for some stuff? I said, yeah. So I started building some weapons for them. And, I would take them apart and hide them all underneath my truck. And I was driving to, like, South Carolina and Georgia and picking up large quantities of drugs and bringing them back. And I remember one day, this guy, the runner that I was meeting, he said, hey, I'm going out on my own. This is the new phone number, right? And I didn't hear from him for a couple of days, and I seen on the news that he had been shot and thrown out on the side of the interstate. in Charlotte. And then a big bust happened, and I was like, I've got to get out of here. At this point, I'd been to treatment probably 12 or 13 times. And was it because I wanted to get sober? No, it's because the brake, life was going so fast, I needed to hit the brakes. I needed to slow down a little bit.
You thought you were just going to dial in the usage, essentially, and deal with some trauma, maybe?
I thought I was just dial the heat was getting too much. I had to get out of town.
Well, thankfully, you weren't there for some of those occurrences with the cartel. You might not be
Was
when
that
you were
the
with us.
Sinaloa cartel or?
I didn't ask and I didn't care.
Yeah.
That's what, and it's one of those things, like when you get involved with them, they need a picture of your license. They need your pictures of your vehicle, your tags, and everything. Like I had a
why
buddy.
do they get all that?
I had a buddy who owed them money, and these guys, 8 to 10 of them, show up at his house with guns. Drag his girlfriend out of the house and just take everything in the house. It's not like you just hear stories. This shit happens.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a lot of people. I've interviewed a lot of people and done a lot of research on this, and been on podcasts talking about cartel and stuff, and talked to the TBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation guys concerning this. And a lot of people don't know, but the cartel used to use gangs like in Los Angeles, et cetera, to kind of outsource selling their drugs and things like that. And now the gangs are just everywhere. Yeah. And people don't know, but like Nashville, pretty much anywhere like a FedEx or UPS hub would be, that's like where their hubs are too. It's a distribution center, right? So like Nashville, Charlotte, North Carolina, Columbus, Ohio, places like that. Those are all kind of like cartel hubs.
Yeah.
And I've been told that, they dress, just like a golfer would look like in khaki pants and try to drive like a white Corolla or something that's, they don't want to be spotted, right? They
You
don't
would never know
obvious.
that. Like some of these people that I was meeting were people you'd never know. And there's a whole underground world attached to this that I knew nothing about, and I had just skimmed the surface to where I got in a lot deeper than I wanted to with this stuff. So when I did step away from that and go to treatment the last time and got sober, it was, once again, God put me in a situation to where it's like, I got something bigger planned for you.
This is when you went to Treehouse Recovery in California.
Yeah, so.
And what clicked there?
I was sitting on my couch one night. I'd just gotten out of treatment in North Carolina, and I was supposed to meet my mom, and I overdosed in a Burger King parking lot. And I go home, at this point, the lights are off, the dogs are not being fed. I'm sitting there with a pistol in my mouth, just trying to rationalize, take the pain away, take the pain away. And at that moment, my mom called, and she was like, I want my son back. And that was like the little glimmer of light in the tunnel that I needed. So I called them, went to California the next day. As soon as I got off the plane, there was a big Spaniard fella there to give me a bear hug, and he was like, come here. I was like, whoa, like, relax a little bit. And I always say that because that's exactly what I needed at that time. I need somebody to hug me and be like, I got you. I got you.
Yeah, you needed love.
Yeah.
Support.
Yeah. When I got there, that was one thing I instantly felt that I'd never felt any other place, was just the love, the compassion, and somebody to bring me in like, I got you. It's okay. I don't care what you've been through in life, what you've done, we got you.
Yeah, walk us through when you get there. And at this point, you're probably not thinking that you're in full-time for recovery, for life, long-term recovery, right?
I still was going back and forth. I knew what I needed to do. Like, this was a 5-month program. And I knew that 30 days, I'm just maybe taking the substance away. I'm not looking at the real issues on why I'm using or what's going on, even starting to address the trauma. So I get there. It's a big physical aspect to what we do. So one of my good friends now, he created the physical piece out there. He's a former SEAL, so these guys are up at 6 o'clock in the morning in boats in the ocean doing surf passage, getting sandy and wet and nasty, then going straight to the gym So a very big physical piece to what they were doing. And that's a very team-based, team dynamic, and that's what makes me tick. That's what I needed. I needed that brotherhood. I needed that sense of purpose. When I took my uniform off, I lost that sense of identity. That's exactly what I needed at that time.
Does it look a lot like the Nashville location with the big gym and?
Yeah, so I did 5 months there, graduated, and I'm retired at the time, so I'm just hanging around. I volunteered for 6 months, start working part time. And they're like, "You want to come on board?" I was like, "Yeah." Obviously, this place saved my life, and I love what they did, the way that they addressed addiction, and I felt like I could bring maybe a little different aspect to it. So went back to school, got my LADAC, started doing a lot of the physical stuff there, did a leadership program. Yeah, did a leadership program with the owner, Justin McMillan, who, Justin McMillan's one guy that has always believed in me from day one. So we were looking at expanding, and he just said, like, "Hey, where do you want to go?"
It's a big deal in life, is having somebody tell you that.
Yeah.
Like, you can do it.
And there was other people that doubted me, and he said, "Where do you want to go?" And doing like a site survey of different places, different locations. Obviously working with a lot of military, being close to Fort Campbell. I said Nashville. So I moved here 3 years ago. Next week, didn't know anyone.
Did you move here sight unseen?
I'd been here. No, I came to do a site survey.
Okay.
But basically untouched. I moved here and didn't know anyone. And on paper, was I did I have the skills or the credentials to do what I was doing? No, but I'm the type of guy, if you give me a mission, I'm going to figure it out. So I moved here and started this thing in a broom closet, rented some space from a local CrossFit gym. Started this thing in a broom closet, was in that broom closet probably 16 hours a day, and figured it out. It's one thing that I always say, if you meet the right people and your heart's in the right place and you're doing things for the right reasons and are just authentic, God's going to put people in your place that matter and are going to help you.
That's right.
And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and look at everything that you have going right now.
Yeah.
And when did you get this building on Charlotte? Exactly.
So we've been at that location, I would say about 7 months now.
Do you have some additional housing?
Yeah, I was eyeing this spot for about a year. It sat there empty, and I was eyeing it for a long time. And, finally we pulled the trigger on it and moved in and completely redone the whole place. So we got 2 houses right behind the facility. So everything's in one centralized location. It's awesome.
But for the listeners, tell us a little, they may not know how much exercise is a part of what y'all do. And from my standpoint, I'm a huge proponent of this, just in my own life and also encouraging it in patients for national addiction specialists, because the structure that comes from from working out on a daily basis, the natural endorphins, the dopamine, the increase in serotonin in your brain, all the studies that show decrease in depression, anxiety, the way it helps out with recovery. Talk about what makes y'all different, versus another recovery center.
Yeah, one thing we have is a big physical aspect to what we do, and we're looking at treating the whole person versus treating a symptom of what's going on, right? One way that we treat biology, obviously, is through physical activity, so we're targeting brain chemistry there. I always say that we have that natural pharmacy in our brains. We just got to recognize and have an awareness on how to use it.
Great way to phrase that.
Exactly. And if I go out here and get high today, it's because I want to change the way that I'm feeling. I get that same chemical release in my brain through working out.
Healthy eye, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously a big physical aspect. Everything is very team-based, team dynamic. But one thing that we're very good at is addressing the social piece of addiction, and putting people in adverse situations to grow together. There's no better way to form bonds with people than to put them in adverse situations together and watch them grow and overcome challenges and adversity together.
And you have a team building thing there, obviously, and you're rebuilding purpose. So you're doing PHP IOP, correct?
Yeah, we have a 3-month PHP, and we like to do 3 months PHP, 3 months IOP. And obviously trying to keep people for as long as possible to give them the best chance.
And from the sounds of it, if somebody's interested, you're okay with just somebody coming by and seeing what you guys do.
That's what I always say, and that's how I've got some of my best friends today. I can sit here and talk about it all day, but I always say, come check it out. Come work out with me. Come feel the community. Come see what we're doing, because it's a lot more than just people working out together. The things that you see, there's healing that happens there. There's people's lives being changed there. And to see it in real time, you can kind of get a better lens on kind of what's going on.
Yeah, and the Secretary of Health, RFK, also he visited y'all's location too. That's, I mean, not every facility has the Secretary of Health come visit them. That's a pretty big deal. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, RFK came a few months ago, and it all came through one of my friends, Mitzi, who's one of my best friends now, and just having, and it all started from just being authentic and talking to people and developing relationships, so through some of her networking, she found that he was looking to come to Nashville and wanted to visit somewhere, and obviously, his outlook on things, we line up a lot with, the things that we do line up with his outlook. So he came, and it was cool. A few days before, Secret Service and everything came and scanned everything, and I already had a site survey out for him. I said, look at this vantage point, this is kind of what's going on here. I'm like, good.
That had to have been mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Experience.
So he had a whole team that came. It wasn't just him, obviously.
He had
so
a
Secret Service team and everything else.
Yeah, he had an advance party that came out and did a site location before he came, and he came and sat down with us and talked about some of his own experiences and struggles, and he was kind of blown away when he heard a lot of the things that we're doing, because everything might look very very simple on the front end, but there's a lot of evidence-based stuff that we're doing on the back end. At the very core, we're trying to heal their brain.
Right.
Big picture aspect, we're trying to change the way addiction is looked at, talked about, and treated. And that's, and with there's a very bad stigma around people with substance abuse, mental health issues. Humans are built to bond, they're built to move. We've gotten so far away from that.
And I don't think the stigma will ever fully go away.
No.
It's something we could work on, right?
Yeah.
Yes, but sorry, go ahead.
No, it starts with that conversation, right? It starts with that conversation. And, RFK even said, like, I would love to see this replicated all across America. So for him to come in and all the hard work that goes into the things that we do, for someone to come in and see at the very core that we're changing lives and saving lives it makes it all worth it.
And have that kind of endorsement.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's huge.
Yeah.
I've been there a couple times, and I definitely will come, and we'll bring some people just to check it out. But I mean, you've been through pain, loss, redemption. So what do you want people to understand about what you're doing now, helping people, besides the Treehouse Recovery thing? Let's say you just meet a family member or veteran, somebody in active addiction. How are you helping them these days?
Yeah, like I said, finding people that really care at the baseline of what we're doing and just coming from the heart. I don't need a bunch of letters after my name to be authentic. Life experience plays into it, but just listening to somebody, understanding that I was sitting over there too. I remember what it feels like. So every time someone new comes in, I put myself right back on that couch with a pistol in my mouth because I have that healthy fear of never going back there, and walking that journey with somebody. And that's the most rewarding thing ever, is seeing someone come in that first day and I get calls, every week, every month, like, hey, thank you. I'm a better father today. I'm a better husband. That makes it all worth it. But life is hard. Whether I'm out here shooting heroin or I'm sitting here talking to you, life is hard. The pressure of life is going to hit every single day. Adversity is going to hit every single day. It's like you speak on like the 4 pillars of resiliency, the mental, physical, the social, and the spiritual. While they might look very, firm at the surface, when that pressure of life hits, and it will every single day, it could be minute or very on a larger scale. If they're not solid, that thing's going to collapse. So really looking at overhauling someone's complete lifestyle.
And it's something you have to constantly keep at. At least for me in recovery, like if I slip on what works for me and what's working for me in my life, work, family, something bad can happen.
Yeah,
So you kind of have to keep up with it.
It's an action-based world.
Right.
Key word there being action, being consistency. Every day is not going to be the Super Bowl. I'm not going to come in here every day and give my best every single day because that's going to look different every single day. So coming in and giving what you got every single day, that's going to change.
I got to know you through business development and our respective facilities, but I did get to learn more of your story about that feature in the Tennessean on you. Tell me about what that did for Treehouse or just you in general being recognized like that. And was it too much or was it just right?
When I started doing all this, I'm not one to, my big thing is work hard, move in silence. So having the recognition is awesome. It's awesome to have someone recognize what you're doing. But just from a personal level, I get, a guy told me this week, he said, I got here because I was at my lowest and I watched one of your videos and I made that call. So
what an awesome thing.
Yeah, if me sitting here talking about some of my struggles and the things that I've went through and being able to come out the other side can help somebody, then it's 100% all worth it.
Exactly. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, living with this survivor's guilt and you isolating fully, going through addiction, recovery, and then starting this program here in Nashville, having people endorse you like the Tennessean RFK, it has to feel good because what you're doing, you're on the right path, absolutely, and there's somebody guiding you through that.
Earlier when I talked about we only see a snapshot of our life and what's out there, thinking back to that video, why not me? The why me has started to show up in my life. Why me?
It's beautiful.
Why me is maybe so I can help guide other people to help them. I'm still seeing that bigger picture.
Bingo.
But it's evident now, and there's evidence to show that why me.
Yeah, you're helping people out now.
Yeah, 100%.
So big picture, you went through those things, got put you in those scenarios, but you couldn't see it then, but you can kind of see it now.
Yeah.
Of, what you can do in this world and the people that you can help.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. What's the biggest part of your story that you want somebody to understand or level with?
I would say that, for veterans that maybe struggle with survivor's guilt, PTS, one thing I had to really understand and come to terms with was I did the best I could in the situations that I was put in. One of my biggest regrets is not having 2 lives to give for my country. When I wasn't killed in combat with my friends, that was hard, but we struggle with a lot of what ifs, what could have, and really understanding that I was put in the best situation with the worst situation, but I did the best I could at that point, you know. And we don't always see the big picture, you know. But I'm a big believer that God will put certain people in your life at certain times, put you in certain situations, and if I have that growth mindset and I can learn from it and grow from it, then that's what it's all about.
Awesome.
Oh, well said.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
well said.
I can't appreciate you more for sharing some of this stuff today.
Yeah.
Just in closing, is there something that you want to leave with the listeners? Anything that you're working on? Any piece of information for somebody struggling out there?
Yeah, you know, obviously, if anyone's out there struggling, you don't have to do this alone. You know, especially men, the number one killer of us is pride and ego. Pride and ego.
Glad you said that.
You know, being able to drop our pride and ego, it don't make you any less of a man to reach out and ask for help.
It makes you more of a man.
Exactly. You know, and that's one thing that I'm really trying to do is redefine what a real man is. You know, being in touch with your emotions, being able to ask for help. But yeah.
Being able to ask for help, I think that's huge.
You know, one thing that we're working on is we started a nonprofit called Treehouse Recovery Tennessee. It's trying to raise funds for individuals who don't have any resources to get into treatment, to help with housing, whatever it may be. You know, my big picture, I would like Treehouse to be open to everybody and not have to worry about funds, you know. So I'm trying to raise money through the nonprofit, trying to do some of these different things just to really not only help people, but change the whole conversation on how addiction is spoken about, looked at, and treated.
I think with what you've built right now, knowing nobody, not having any connections here, I definitely think you can make that happen.
Yeah.
And I hope some of our listeners can help contribute or just be a part of it if they'd like to.
Yeah.
But appreciate you so much for today. And I know the same goes for Chad.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing everything. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, I appreciate it. There's nothing better than...
Thanks for your service now.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
thank you.
Especially.
Sure.
Yeah.
Nothing better than sitting here on a Thursday with a man in a nice flannel shirt. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I hope next time we play kickball, you don't have an injury like you did last time.
I'll be healed up.
We'll have to go skeet shooting. We'll have to test those military skills.
Oh, yeah. Well, come on.
No,
Right.
I can't wait. Yeah, I can't wait to connect with you more. But thank you so much,
Yeah,
Brandon,
thanks,
for
guys. I
joining us.
appreciate y'all
Yeah,
having me.
awesome.
Everybody out there in listener land, please check out Treehouse Recovery. I'm sure they can get in touch with you do you want to have a website or an email address put up here?
Yeah, treehouserecoverytn.com, or you can find our admissions line on there, or you can email me directly at brandon.fender@treehouserecovery.com.
Yeah, thank you so much. Get at Brandon if you need some help. And thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Brandon.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.